was just totally moved by what was going on there. Well, during my activities over there, I got arrested and was charged with entering a township without a permit. But the realization that to even go into a township, you had to go to the police station and get a permit was so contrary to what we knew in this country of where you can go from Boardman to Austintown or to Youngstown without stopping at the police station and getting a permit was so unimaginable to me that and to understand the consequences of not getting one. And then in meeting the people, the families, whose husbands were in hiding or were underground, whose sons were victims in some way or another, usually through victims of violence, was just numbing. And then I met widows, four widows in fact, whose husbands had just been murdered and their bodies were found in shallow graves on the beach. And I went and I met with these widows at the cemetery early one morning. And they were so glad that I was there, and they asked me, was there anything I could do as a judge? They had never seen a judge before. I'd never seen a black judge. And as I explained, I had no jurisdiction here. There's nothing I can do. But I can tell you what we did in our country. And then I told them briefly the story of slavery and the abolitionist movement and how whites came together with blacks to challenge the system of slavery and of the Civil War and the constitutional amendments. And I just very lightly went through those phases of our history and assured them that the same thing's going to happen in South Africa. You're going to have your freedom. I can't say when, but you're going to have it, just as we in the United States struggled to get it, and we are still struggling for more people to become free. When I look back on that, I don't know where a lot of my answers came from, but I was struck by the fact that when I finished my talk and words of encouragement, one of the ladies spoke up in a tongue I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand the language. And then one of the South Africans who spoke English was standing with me, and I asked him what she said. She said, we want to thank you with a song. And this is 7:30 in the morning at this cemetery. Very, very awesome surroundings, bare. And they began singing a South African song. It was a chant. It was a plea, and the tempo, and the urgency, and the pathos with which they were expressing themselves just overwhelmed me. And when I came back and wrote my report, I mentioned that incident. Shortly thereafter, I was invited to speak to the Bar Association on my trip and give this report. And when I got to that part of my talk, trying to describe these mothers and their plea, I couldn't finish my talk. And I had no idea I'd have that kind of emotion. That is that was such an impact on me that I tell the story very selectively. I don't just tell it to everybody because it's not the kind of story that I want to just take the pulpit or the podium and rant about. There's one more that I'll mention to you. I believe firmly in mentoring young people because I have been so blessed. I had a mentor, Maynard Dickerson, who took me under his wing here in Youngstown and reminded me at about the 8th grade that I was not doing well, that I was not learning anything. And he did it in such a dramatic way that I was stunned. And then he asked me, did I want to learn? And I said, yes. He said, well, I'll work with you. And he took me under his wing, helped me with my writing, my vocabulary, spelling. And that's what laid the foundation for me to do what I did. I worked on the newspaper that he had. It helped me with my writing in school. It sharpened, as I went through my educational experience, it sharpened my ability to analyze, to read with clarity and understanding. That was also basic to me and was important to my getting through college, law school, practicing as a lawyer, and as a judge. And there were many times when I would be writing opinions that I would think about Maynard Dickerson and what he did, the lessons that he offered to me on these fundamentals, which are so important. And when I'm often asked by students, and this is particularly true when I first became a judge because many people hadn't seen black judges before, and they'd say, well, how'd you become a judge? I said, well, I wasn't born a judge. I said, I was born just like you are. And I struggled, and one misstep, and I could have destroyed my life, but I had this person who came along and he rescued me. And I urged them to think in terms of being mentors and to help young people. I had, when I was at South High School, I was going to a junior prom. It was formal. Well, we were poor. We were just coming out of the Depression. I did not have a tuxedo. But Mr. Dickerson said, I have an extra tuxedo, he said, which I'll loan to you, and you go to the prom. So I was at his house, and he and his wife helped me dress for the prom with the studs, and then he showed me how to tie the tie. And he stood behind me and tied this black tie, this formal tie. And I went on to the prom and had a great time. That would have been in 1943. Well, when I got to Cincinnati and I was on the court, I could not do a lot of the advocacy type of things that I had been doing as a civil rights lawyer, so I took up a lot of other things, such as mentoring and working with young people. And I had a young mentor who was a high school student, and we had a great relationship. I took him places with me, and he was a good student, worked hard, one of 5 children. And I was scheduled to give a commencement speech at the University of Dayton Law School. And I thought, well, maybe he would like to come with me and experience a college law school commencement. So I asked his mother, would it be all right if I picked him up on a Saturday morning and brought him with me? She said, oh yeah, that would be great, it would be good for him. And then she in turn called my secretary and asked, well, how should he dress for it? And they told her, well, he should, a suit and or a sport jacket and a tie and a shirt. That would be sufficient. Nothing real, elaborate. So I was to pick him up on a street corner in a very depressed area of Cincinnati where he lived. And they lived on the second story of over a grocery store. So I pulled up at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he was not waiting at the curb like I thought he would. And I thought, well, he's a kid, he's a teenager, he's probably slept in on a Saturday morning, probably had a big night last night. I was thinking some silly things. And so I got out of the car to go up the steps to his flat, and by the time he was coming down, and he had on a nice suit and shirt, and he had a tie in his hand. And he says, "Judge, could you help me tie my tie?" And I thought, sure. So we're standing on the sidewalk on this corner in this very difficult neighborhood, and I'm standing behind him tying this tie. And I had a flashback. It went back to the time when I was in the home of Maynard Dickerson and his wife on Oak Hill Avenue, preparing to go to the prom, didn't know how to tie a tie, and Maynard Dickerson was standing behind me in front of a mirror, helped me tie that tie. I had the flashback to that. That had been 50-some years before. And as I thought about that, here I was the beneficiary of the kindness of this man, this lawyer who took me under his wing. Many years later, this young man that I'm trying to help is asking me for the same favor on a street corner. And it was all I could do. I just broke down. And Fanny said, tie to tie. We got in the car, and I said, his name was Raymond. I said, Raymond, let me just explain something to you. And I told him the story. I said, the point is, more people need to reach out and be helpful, because you never know what can happen to individuals that you help. When Maynard Dickerson was helping me tie that tie, he didn't know what ever become of me. He didn't know that I would become a lawyer or be general counsel of the NAACP, or that I would be involved in South Africa, or that I would be a federal judge. He didn't know all those things, but he was helping me at that point. And I urge all people, all men particularly, but women too, all men, to help these young people who are out here today, to help them in the moment of crisis, because you never know what that can mean. And if persons want to know what kind of reward you get for that, just consider the scriptures, because you find throughout the scriptures admonitions about doing good and helping others, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I said, you'll find that by doing that, you might get to heaven on the cheap. And you can't ask for more than that. And I have tried in my life, in my adult life, to do this. I had a serious illness here in Youngstown when I was in law school. I was afflicted with what is known as miliary tuberculosis. It's a form of TB that was said to be about 90% fatal. And how I came to be afflicted with it, I don't know. But it was I'd been to a Cleveland Browns football game in December 28th. It was I'll never forget it. They were playing Detroit Lions, and when I got back to town, I was chilled from being in the stands throughout that game. and I got very ill. And that's when it was determined that I had contracted or was the victim of biliary tuberculosis. The timing was amazing. It was at the time that the wonder drugs had just come to the market. The wonder drugs that were effective against biliary tuberculosis. And I began, when I was taken out to the tuberculosis sanitarium on Kirk Road here, I was being treated. They began to treat me with these wonder drugs. And my recovery occurred and was deemed a miracle. The physicians came in from all over the country to study my case because it was remarkable that a person could recover from biliary as quickly as I did. And when I reflect back on that, I concluded that I was spared for a reason. And that reason is to try to do good. That's why I've never cared about money, never cared about rewards or being compensated. I think that my experience and my blessings have created a situation that I shall be forever obligated to try to do to do positive things, and that's what I try to do. When people ask me, when I reached my 90th birthday last month, I would be teased, kidded by people about, oh, what are you doing? What kind of vitamins are you taking? What kind of, my simple answer is, I've just been blessed, and so long as I can function and do things, I'll do them. And when that time comes that I cannot, I'll accept the judgment.
How's your voice doing with water? Yeah. I'd like to start talking about Simeon a little bit. You told a great story. If we can start with that and then take it where you want to. Your earliest memory of Simeon was with the camera.
Well, I would see Simeon at church occasionally and at the YMCA. It was sort of where his father was the director of. But the most meaningful recollection that I have is when I was over at the South Side swimming pool when the NACP Youth Council was attempting to gain admission to the pool, and knowing full well we're going to be rebuffed, because that's what would happen every time. But lo and behold, who was there with his camera around his neck and a pad was Simeon Booker. And Simeon was a very young guy. He was a kid too. He was a pretty young man. But he had that knack for history, recording and documenting events. And at a time when very few people, certainly we weren't, he was older than my group, but even the kids who were around at that time, at that age, they weren't thinking of the importance of documenting and recording events. But that Simeon had that sense of how important it was to not merely engage in the act, but to preserve the act. And with his nose for news and his sense of the relevant, he was there, and not just at the Southside pool. You'd find Simeon around town always with his camera. And of course, he went on to become a first-rate journalist. He's up in years now, but he's still with us. He received a Neiman Scholarship, as we know, at Harvard. He was a reporter for the Cleveland Call-and-Post. Went on to report for the Afro-American and Jet Magazine, headed their Washington bureau. And I'll say this about Simeon. I do not think I would have been a judge had it not been for Simeon Booker. Because he, as the Washington editor of Jet magazine, he had a page that was a very powerful page, well read. It was called Ticker Tape. And that was read by all the major political people in Washington and, of course, around the country. And Simeon, well, I'll back up before that. I was a stringer for Simeon. By stringer, I mean, when I was in college, I would send little tips in to Simeon for his columns. And any column, any tip I sent, I would be paid by Jet magazine, I think $75. And that was good money when you were in college and didn't have a lot of money. And so I would, when I would see that green envelope, that envelope with a green window come from Chicago, I knew I got a check from Simeon. But then he had this column, and when I was at the NAACP, and then of course I was involved in a lot of controversial matters, school desegregation, employment cases, criminal justice activities, and if whenever there was something very significant, I'd send a note off to Simeon, a tip of one kind or another, or some background. Or if I were in Washington, I'd stop and see him at his office, and if he waited and thought it was newsworthy, I could rest assured that in a week or two, a few weeks, I would see either a headshot of me or the item itself in ticker tape, and that projected me to a national level, because I had a national position as general counsel, but to have occasionally my name appear on his ticker tape, or the picture, just a headshot, it elevated me to a level that made it fairly not easy, but it made me a competitor when my name was presented to President Carter for appointment to the court. And for that, I shall be forever grateful to Simeon, because he did that not just for me, he did it for a lot of people. A lot of nationally known political figures, entertainment figures, who achieved a level of prominence can thank Simeon Booker for the way he projected them in Jet magazine and in Ebony magazine, and certainly in his ticker tape column.
When you look at what Simeon worked on in terms of the freedom rides, the voting rights issues, Emmett Till, Selma, he had some work there. What do you think, and you think of his work, and we get back to the word of courage and putting yourself in the line is some heavy stuff. What do you think Simeon's legacy is toward that? And a lot of times the word galvanizing, the Emmett Till coverage galvanized the civil rights movement as things started happening. I guess where in history do you see Simeon's role and what he did, what he dared to do, and the things that happened because of his work?
Well, for one thing, I am firmly convinced that he played a similar role in the evolution of black political power in this country. Through his reportage and his focus as a journalist from way back up through his time with Ebony and Jet, he created a level of awareness and consciousness about the potential of black political possibilities that no one else had done and no one else has since done. And to that extent, I think he was instrumental in the election of Barack Obama as president. because he created such a sense of strength, of the potential of strength of black voters, that it was not deemed unthinkable when Barack Obama announced that he was going to run for president. There was no vacuum. It was an evolutionary process, and people were confident. Some people weren't sure he could win, but it was not fanciful to conclude that that a person with the experience and the charm and the smarts of Barack Obama could win, could get the golden ring. And so Simeon Booker, I think history will record, after it has a chance to let the smoke clear, after President Obama leaves office and people come to really realize what a historical